my physical therapist's kind of suggestion as we were going through the pregnancy was go ahead and just have a C-section. Let's save your pelvic floor the quote unquote trauma of a vaginal birth. And I just knew that God didn't make my body to fail. And I knew there had to be a better way.
Welcome to the Happy Homebirth podcast, your source for positive natural childbirth stories and your community of support, education, and encouragement in all things homebirth and motherhood. The pelvic floor. It can be wounded during childbirth, but could it be healed during the process instead? Hey there, happy homebirthers, and welcome to episode 283 of the Happy Homebirth podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Fusco, and this week we are speaking to Victoria and Jonathan Hedrick. Victoria Hedrick is a wife to her wonderful husband, Jonathan, and the mother of their almost 3-year-old daughter, Josie. They live on a small piece of land in Virginia that they are slowly turning into a homestead. Victoria enjoys fishing, canoeing, baking sourdough, and all things babies and home birth. They're expecting their second baby anytime now. Victoria and Jonathan have walked through quite an amazing journey throughout their marriage, particularly in relationship to birth and the physical and emotional healing it provided. You are going to be in awe of this episode. And if you are ready to prepare deeply for your home birth, make sure you use the code podcast when you join Happy Homebirth Academy today. The link is in the show notes. I am honored to help your family feel confident and excited as you prepare for your beautiful home birth. All right, let's waste no time and dive in. Please remember that the opinions of my guest may not necessarily reflect my own and vice versa. And this show is not medical advice, it's an educational tool, so continue to take empowered responsibility for your health and your family. Victoria and Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on the Happy Homebirth podcast.
Well, thanks for having us. I'm so excited.
We're really excited to be here.
I am thrilled to have the two of you. I love couples interviews. I think there is something so deep and special about getting to hear a story from both of your perspectives. And there's something for everybody. There's things that, Jonathan, I'm sure that you remember that Victoria doesn't, and Victoria the same. You know, we have these two experiences coming together. So these are always so powerful. So thank you for being here. I can't wait to get into your story. Before we do that, would you both mind taking just a moment to introduce yourself and your family to the listeners?
So yes, my name is Jonathan Hedrick, and I am a physical therapist assistant. That's what I do now.
Yeah, I'm Victoria. We've been married for 7 years, and we have a 2.5-year-old little girl and another one on the way this summer. Yeah, I love all things home birth and minimalism and natural medicine and motherhood, and that's what I spend my days. It's very full right now with a little one, but that's what I love doing. So.
Oh, that is beautiful. You are in good company. We can really relate with the things that we like.
Yeah.
I love that. That's awesome, Victoria. Oh man. Okay, so I'm so excited to hear about you. You guys have such an interesting journey, and I cannot wait to dive in. Could we just go back to the beginning and hear how did you guys get together in the first place, and then how did the getting married kind of come along?
Sure, I'll kind of take the lead on this initially. So we met. My brother and I did some independent film back several years ago, and so we were on a project and working on this particular independent feature that we were involved with. And I met my wife there. She was in the catering department. She happened to know some people that were involved in the film as well, and so she was there feeding and taking care of people, and that's kind of how she fed me, and I fell in love. So that's the classic way to a man's heart. So we basically kept up after that project for several years. Got married approximately 5 years after that project, and that's kind of the basic, back to the bare bone beginnings of our relationship and how we met to where we ended up being married. So.
Wow, beautiful.
So we got married in September of 2017. And on our honeymoon, we realized something was very wrong with me. We couldn't have sex. I was in horrible pain. We could not figure out what was wrong. So we came home, and on the internet, you get all kinds of answers. We were looking everywhere. We couldn't figure anything out. So finally, I couldn't get in with a doctor until December. So we had those months where we were just, waiting and trying to get in with this doctor. Finally got in with her, and she didn't even do an internal exam, just looked at me and said, no, you need to go to an OBGYN. And I had never been to an OBGYN, and we couldn't get in with him until March. So, 6 months after we got married, we finally got in with this OBGYN. And honestly, it was like one of the most, for me, dehumanizing experiences, where he walked in with his couple of, students and never really looked at me and just basically said, oh, yeah, you've got a tiny yeast infection. So here's a antibiotic for that. And here's some lidocaine for your pain. Go home and try harder. And if nothing has happened in a few months, then we'll come back and we'll do surgery. And that was it. And it was just like, what do we do now? And I went out and just sat in the car and sobbed. And it was just like, we've been married for 6 months and this is not working. And it was really, it was a really low place in my life for sure. And then shortly after that, my sister-in-law had a pretty traumatic hospital birth and was seeing a physical therapist, a pelvic floor physical therapist. And I didn't even know they existed at the time. And so we got in with her and she got us right in. And it was a very different experience. She was incredibly kind. She was a Christian lady. I'm a Christian. And so we already had that in common. And then just everything that she was saying was resonating with the experience that we had had. And so she ended up diagnosing me with what's called a microperforate hymen. Basically, she said basically it's shocking you had a period because the hole is so tiny. That in itself is not a problem. The issue was that in my teens I trained horses and rode a lot of horses bareback, and apparently I had micro torn the hymen over and over again until it had built up into basically just solid scar tissue all around that area. And then basically just my pelvic floor, like it was up inside. It wasn't just entrance kind of stuff. It wasn't just in the hymen. So that, and from all of our attempts to try to have sex for 6 months, I had developed vaginismus from all the pain. So she put everything on hold and just said, stop doing everything. And she started doing a bunch of therapy on me, but she also introduced me to dilators, which I'd never even heard of. And she slowly walked me through the progression of using dilators to slowly break up all the scar tissue, as well as massage and some other exercises and stretches and things. So that, you wait 6 months after you get married, and the therapy took 4 months. And we were finally able to have sex 10 months after we got married. But that was kind of still the beginning of the road. We still had there was still so much scar tissue, so much pain. So the next 3 years we spent still just working through all the therapy, thankfully I didn't have to do the dilators the whole time, but it was still just a lot of healing, a lot of hard work, a lot of pain. But we got through it, and it was one of those times, it was a very dark place in my life where you question God all the time, right? We shouldn't, but we just still do. And it was like, in my mind, it's like, I thought that if we waited for marriage, it would be a beautiful thing. That's God's plan, right? Like one man, one woman, beautiful, all this. And then you get married and it's like, this isn't beautiful. This is horrible. And what did I do wrong? And so I just spent a lot of time struggling through that question of like, this isn't what I define as good. And yet this is happening to me. And we know God's will is good. So why is this not happening the way it's supposed to? Or my idea of good. So that was a really interesting journey. And then that kind of led into, we finally got the green light from our physical therapist to get pregnant. But she was very hesitant about a vaginal birth. And we got pregnant really easily, thankfully. That was such a blessing, because I know it's not that way for everybody. And my physical therapist's kind of suggestion as we were going through the pregnancy was, go ahead and just have a C-section. Let's save your pelvic floor the quote unquote trauma of a vaginal birth. And I just knew that God didn't make my body to fail. And I knew there had to be a better way. We went about finding a midwife, and because I knew from my research that my best chance of not tearing was going to be to have a home birth, because I would have someone there with me the whole time, making sure that I was doing what I could. I mean, some things are out of our control, but to do what I could to avoid more trauma because I really didn't want to go through therapy again. Yeah, so that was kind of that part of it.
Thinking about all of this, I mean, this is heavy. This is not just a light experience. This, just hearing your heart in it, this had to have felt devastating.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that to be so excited, all right, like we are married, we're going to have this beautiful intimate experience together, and then no, it's not happening. I'm curious to know, I know that it was hard. What was your thought process as you were seeking all of this help? Where was your mind? Like, how did the emotional side play out as you were going through this experience?
For me, it was life altering. Like, I felt like everything was a lie.
Mm,
Everything I'd been taught, everything I believed, it felt like the whole world came crashing down and I didn't know how to process it. And thankfully, my husband was right there. I mean, I truly believe he's the only man I could have married that would have gone through something that crazy and unforeseen and still just been such a steady. I mean, he told me over and over, if we never have sex, it doesn't matter. We're going to be happy. We're going to be married. This is what God's given us. We're going to be happy with it. I didn't feel that way. It was really challenging and it shook my faith. It shook my life. It was really hard to process. And even it kind of goes into my birth story because I didn't actually resolve all of that emotionally until I was pregnant with my daughter.
wow.
And it was 3 days before her birth when my husband he had told me over and over because I had this concept that if I wanted something and I prayed for it, God was going to sabotage it and he was going to do the opposite on purpose. And I don't know where that came from in my life, what made me believe that, but I believed it.
Mhm.
And during our pregnancy, my husband just kept over and over again telling me, like, you have to open your hands to God. You have to accept what his design is, his definition of good doesn't necessarily mean ours.
In his will.
Yeah, in his will. Yeah, and it was 3 days before her birth when I went out. I took a really long walk and I prayed and I talked to her. I prayed and I just said, God, I'm opening my hands. Like your will, I've got to let this go. And it was years. I mean, years. At that point, it was goodness. I mean, it was most of my life, but just from our wedding until her birth, I mean, it was 5 years of trying to break apart this pain that I had been dealing with from these ideas that God did this on purpose.
Mm.
And not being able to look back and see that what I considered a terrible travesty was actually this beautiful puzzle that God was putting together that years later, like I can look back now and it all makes sense. But in the moment, I couldn't. And so many women, I've been able to help so many women who've had issues and haven't known what to do. And I would have never known the answers if I hadn't gone through that. So, yeah, it's just this opening and accepting of God's will that I had to learn through that whole experience that I think is part of why our daughter's birth story was so special because it was a huge emotional healing for me as well and a physical healing too. So, yeah.
But isn't just the idea of that very area that you were struggling with, that you were, all of this emotionalism was stored up in, and all of these quote problems that you were having, that area is the very area that your daughter had to come through. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
connection there is just mind blowing to me. Jonathan, what did you want to say about that?
As a new husband walking into this situation, it was, just thinking back while she was telling it just brought back so many memories. But, you know, I'll go back just a little bit. I had just an outstanding example of what it means to be a husband. And what it means to be a father. And, you look back and you can see God's hand through all of that. And, it was hard. All I wanted to do was love my wife as best as I possibly could, and support her as much as I could. All the other stuff didn't matter to me. Like, she's like, "I'm so sorry we can't have sex." I'm like, "Honey, it does not matter." We got to look at the big picture. We got to pull back and see the big picture of what God's really doing. We don't know. So it took so much faith, but even though it was so hard, you learn so much, through hardships like that. But I still was able to take the example that I had been given of what it means to lay down my life for the church, quote unquote. And like, what a picture. Yes, it was a very small area, but you get married with expectations. She has expectations, I have expectations. We both are like, "Oh, here we go. We're jumping into this." And then when things don't go according to plan, it's rattles your brain a little bit and shakes your world. But I don't think if I had not had that example, I would not have handled it well. And, all I could do to just be there for her in any way that I possibly could. So it was a very maturing process, I feel like, for me in a lot of ways, to really learn what it means to set aside my needs for her. And I think it's just so important for men not to get just so wrapped up in our worlds, and to actually listen to what our wives need. And because we don't see the same things through the emotional lens that goes on. Our world our perspective is just so completely different. I will never understand a woman's brain, but it's just the way God made it. So, but I tried really hard to get down, to set aside everything that I needed and get down to the bare bone basics of what was going on with her and her brain and her heart and everything. So, but I think that lesson of learning how to just no, whatever God's will is for this situation, Lord, I welcome that, and we will walk through that together as a couple. So it was a very big experience right off the bat. There was no there was no welcome, like, ease into it. It was just no, boom, here's your first trial that you're going to face. So
Yeah. I mean, Jonathan, all I can think of is just like humble submission. That
mhm.
lesson of
Yeah.
humble submission, like, Lord, I'm going to do what you would have me do in taking care of my wife and loving her, and I submit it. I submit it all to you. I submit my needs. I submit any thoughts that I had to you, and I'm just going to focus on her. And Victoria, just thinking of where you must have been in this sense of, why me? Why am I broken? You both came into this wanting to be able to provide for one another. And then that breakdown of, it's not happening the way that we thought it would. I can't do it. The stress that I am hearing, that I can just so deeply understand, of, why is this not working? I can't give you what I want to give you and what I feel like you need and deserve. And then, Jonathan, yes, just on your end, being able to see all of this and to see, oh, this is where she is and this is what's on her heart. She's upset and broken for these reasons. And I see that, and I can step back from this and I can see, hey, here's the bigger picture. Like, let's focus on this bigger picture. What a beautiful, inspiring story in so much pain. And I do not play down the pain that had to have been there for both of you. And yet here you are sharing this. I mean, what a lesson. I mean, I'm having a hard time keeping it together. What a beautiful lesson. Thank you guys for sharing this. This is so powerful.
It was a big season of growth in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
It was, and looking back now, I see how it brought us together in a way that we wouldn't have been brought together otherwise. Like, we had to learn to communicate and just live differently than we would have otherwise. So it was a really good lesson.
Yeah, and it's also amazing how you can be intimate in so many other ways.
Yeah.
Intimacy is just, it's so so many avenues to get to that,
Yeah.
to get to that. And it was just a beautiful journey, honestly, looking back, because we got to experience being intimate without the, traditional, just not being able to have sex, but we were still able to be close and share that oneness that we had hoped for, even without sex. I think that was also honestly just really beautiful, just a wonderful thing that we got to experience.
Yep.
Yeah. And how it's just so interesting to see it, being on the other side and looking back. Just like you couldn't have known what was going to happen. You didn't know how it was going to all unfold. And yet when you look back, it's like, wow, look at all of these things that we learned and the ways that we grew and the lessons that we gained from such a tough thing that now is like, yes, it was tough, and also it really has provided so much.
Yeah.
For sure.
Wow. Well, with all of that as our kind of backdrop to this story, I am so interested to hear how this pregnancy unfolded.
Yeah, so we got the green light from our therapist. We had both wanted children. I mean, we wanted kids right away. So we had been waiting and waiting, and so thankfully we got pregnant right away. And I had already started listening to your podcast at that point. So I had kind of been stowing away information in my mind, and your podcast amongst a bunch of other resources that I had been looking into, just trying to get information on what birth could look like, because I was, I knew what my issues were, and I was like, what are my best chances of having a good vaginal birth? And in that process, we decided to go ahead and have a midwife. It was an interesting decision. My mom had 10 children, and she had her first 4 at the hospital, and then she had 6 free births and wild pregnancies. So I just grew up, I was a home birth baby. The concept was very easy for me to grasp. And then Jonathan came from a much different world.
I was an EMT for, I guess, 10 years, I guess. It was the year we got married was when I stopped. So I had the more Western medicine experience with birth and thought process with birth. Like, oh, you just have a baby in the hospital. I mean, yeah, I knew about having home births, but I didn't know anybody personally that I can think of, off the top of my head, that actually had done home birth at that point in time. So it was just a new concept for me.
Yeah, I mean, we had talked about it some, but then once we got pregnant, it was like, we kind of have to make a decision now. And just with our experience, Jonathan was very understanding of the fact that, like, I'd already had enough trauma. Like, this needed to be a good experience. And so we both decided to get a home birth midwife. She was a nurse midwife in our area, and we clicked with her right off the bat when we met her.
She was a great. Huge answer to prayer.
Yeah.
Because I was totally fine with her doing the home birth. Like, it didn't bother me. I mean, it scared me a little bit, but not. It was more just the unknown. Like, I've just never been through this before. I don't know. So we talked about it. I was like, well, I think it'd be great to have a nurse midwife, certified nurse midwife. As it felt like a good option, just to be able to do things if necessary, and if not, everything it would work out fine. But so that was kind of where we kind of met there in the middle with that. So, and
we're like 10 minutes from a hospital, so it wasn't a concern. So we met with her and we hired her. She was just fantastic from the get-go. As far as the pregnancy went, my very first symptom, 3 days past ovulation, I started itching everywhere. And it was like, oh, okay, I think something's different. Even before I got the positive test, it was about 3 weeks of just itching head to toe. It was kind of miserable.
It's really weird.
And then about the time the itching stopped, the food aversions and nausea showed up. And so that was the next, I think it was 4 to 16 weeks. I was just horribly nauseous. I never threw up, but I felt like I would have felt better if I had, because foods, everything, smells got to me so bad. Food got to me. So that was kind of miserable. But once we got beyond that, the rest of the pregnancy was really smooth. I mean, I just had some edema, which was uncomfortable. And then I started having a lot of muscle cramps, which my midwife tried to help me with, but it just kind of seemed like that was just the way I'm pregnant, because it's happening again during this pregnancy. So I think I just get cramped. Yeah. So for preparing for birth, I listened to your podcast. I listened to several other podcasts. I read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth and the Bradley method. And we went ahead and did that
Bradley class. Yeah.
Just so that we would both kind of we wanted to do something together so we were both on the same page, because I had done so much individual research, and we wanted something to kind of like join us in like with a game plan for how to go into birth together. The other thing that our midwife, she was great. She had me do garlic to make sure that my GBS test came back negative. Like all these preventative things I hadn't even heard of at that point, to just make sure like she was on top of my diet so that I didn't have a positive gestational diabetes test, and like all these things that were just all preventative, so that I stayed quote unquote low risk, even though I think high risk is used a little too often. So we did that. And then right up before the birth for about 3 weeks, she had us doing perineal massage, because she really, I mean, we were still pretty concerned at that point. It was still pretty uncomfortable to have sex, and I still had a lot of, you could feel the scar tissue still. So she was just really wanting us to try to work that out as much as we could. And I was doing some exercises, and yeah, that was mostly what we did to prepare.
It was also really helpful too, because my background as in therapy, I worked in an outpatient clinic where I did a lot of craniosacral therapy. I did a lot of myofascial release. I did all kinds of stuff like that. So I was very hands-on therapist where at the clinic I was at. So her pelvic floor therapist was like, "Oh, yay, you know how to do this stuff."
Seriously, that is like,
It was
wow,
like
what a gold mine.
Yeah. So, I helped with a lot of the, scar massage, myofascial stuff to the whole pelvic floor and everything during that. And I also helped with her alignment and stuff, keeping her pelvis in alignment and stuff during that pregnancy. So there was a lot I could do. So it was really helpful.
That had to just feel so good to be able to support. And once again, we're talking about intimacy in different ways. Like what a level of intimacy to be able to support Victoria in that way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
And saved a lot of money.
Yeah, that too. That's also helpful. One question I was thinking of is, when you interviewed your midwife, did you present everything and say, this is what's been happening. This is what my pelvic floor therapist says. What do you think? How did that conversation go?
Yeah, she was so chill about it. We explained our history. We explained exactly where I was at that point in time. She's also a Christian. And she was like, this is what you want. We may not get it, but we're going to do our best to get it. And we're going to do everything we can to give you the birth you want, even though we have this huge obstacle and we don't know. It's a big question mark. We don't know what's going to happen. Birth is already just, it's wild. You don't know what's going to happen. And so she was just super chill about it, and very much just like,
very
let's
supportive.
Trust God. Let's do everything we can. And we're going to have a backup plan if we need it. But we're just going to do everything we can to make this happen for you.
Yeah. But it was also still a real scary point for you, because you did not want to go to the hospital, like at all. And that was one of my big prayers during that whole time. Lord, please help this to work and go smoothly at home, because I don't want that extra added stress and experience, especially if she had to go, especially for a first one like that, for her. So
yeah.
But she was very, very encouraging. I think she even said at one point in time, like, I think that this will help. Like you were saying, like it might help, might not, but I think she even said something about the scar tissue, that she felt like this was going to break up a lot of that scar tissue, which made sense in my mind. So
yeah, big change.
Yes.
a lot coming through. Things to be broken out. Well, I think that is huge. Having a care provider who can hear you out, hear where you are, and say, you know what, we're going to trust God. We're going to trust your body. We're going to see how it unfolds. We're not going to say no before we've even tried. We're not going to just say, sorry, can't work. But we're just going to trust, and we're going to believe that this is going to work until there is obvious evidence that there is something not working. What a great way to go into it.
Oh, yeah, she was very much that way. She was just like, we're going to keep our hands open in labor. We're going to watch. We're going to keep an eye on it. If we need to transfer, we will. But we're going to just let you have an honest try at this first. And I appreciated that so much.
Okay, so we are at the point of this story where we're kind of coming up to the end of your pregnancy. I'm curious to hear, you already kind of mentioned you were having this struggle of opening your hands. submitting, releasing, however you want to explain it. Would you kind of go into that more and then we can lead into the actual birth story?
Yeah, so we live on a river, and our home, the water supply is a spring that's right by our house. And so in the fall, of course, there's a lot of hurricanes that come in, and so we get like the residual rain from those hurricanes. And 3 days before the birth, we had a huge storm from one of the hurricanes, and the water went up. And when it comes up, the muddy water gets in our spring. We have to turn our pump off because we don't want the muddy water getting sucked up into the house. It's a whole thing. And so our power went out, the water was off, everything. And we were looking at like the due date. Like I was past my due date. I was 6 days over, I think. And which I was fine with. I was kind of in that headspace of like, just cook as long as you want because I'm a little nervous about what's coming.
Take your time.
So that day, we had no water, no electricity, and it hit me. It's like, I want to have a birth pool. And the midwife, like, if this water doesn't change and I go into labor, we're going to have no electricity and no water. And so the rain had stopped and I went walking back by the river and I just kind of broke apart. And it was like, God, I need you to help me trust you. And I told baby, I was like, I'm ready. You can come whenever you want now. Because at that point, I had just been kind of in my head, like, don't come, don't come, don't come. But I was coming up on that 42-week mark. And so I was starting to get I didn't want to dealing with being augmented. I didn't want any of that. So I was just walking back there. And that's when I really just decided, like, God, your will is what I will decide for me is good. And I will be okay with this. So if that means going to the hospital, if that means not having electricity and no birth tub and all this stuff, like I will be okay with this. You are writing this story for me and I'm opening my hands and letting you take over. So that afternoon, the power came back on. Jonathan got home from work and we set up the birth pool and we both decided to just get in bed and we were trying to go to bed early. Ended up, it was about 1:00 in the morning. And right as I went to step into bed, I felt my first contraction.
Of course.
Oh, of course. Like right when I just give it to God, now I'm going to start and I'm going to go right into labor right now. And thankfully, it didn't quite work out that way. It was prodromal labor, but I was up all night. The next day it went away. Jonathan went back to work. It was a Friday. And his coworkers thought he was nuts for being at work. And when I was I wouldn't say I didn't have contractions. I had little contractions here and there, but it clearly was not labor. So then that night when he got home, like right when he got home, it all started kicking in again.
Your body was like, oh, he's home. Yay. Let's start now.
So, and at that point, like our water was good, everything was great. And I started having contractions. And then at 3 a.m, I had my first bloody show. And I was dealing with contractions that were like every 5 minutes until about 7 a.m. And then 7, I got up and was just like, I can't be in bed anymore. This is so uncomfortable. And that was a Saturday morning. And went in the bathroom and I'd lost my mucus plug. And it was like we both just like looked at each other. It was like, oh, okay, this is happening. Like this is actually happening. And the contractions never went away that day. It was all day long, but it wasn't bad. Poor Jonathan, I made him clean the whole house and do all kinds of stuff and just kind of dealt with the contractions. It wasn't anything like horrible. I was able to talk through them and keep going. So all day was just kind of those contractions. And then about the time, our midwife came and checked on the baby too at like 5-ish. And then about the time that the sun went down, everything just took off and it was real labor time. He filled up the birth pool that afternoon too, because we were feeling like it was going to actually happen. And I'm so glad we started early because they don't really tell you that it's going to drain your entire hot water heater. And then you have to wait on it to reheat. So it was, I think you started at like 6 and it wasn't until like 10:30 that it was actually full of hot water and I could actually get in. At that point, I was just begging to get in. But yeah, now we know for next time. Start early with the water. So yeah, I got in the birth pool and everything shut down for like 20 minutes. So I was really grateful for that break, which I knew was a possible thing from like listening to your podcast and other women, that the water could slow them down. But my goodness, it was heaven. Like it's literally the whole midwife epidural thing is real. Like it was incredible. The moment I got in, it was like everything stopped. But then once they started up, I could relax through them so much better. And from doing the Bradley class, I knew like relaxation was going to be like my key. And as long as I could stay ahead of the contractions and really focus on relaxing, it was fine. It didn't hurt. It wasn't bad. Now, if I got scared, which I did a few times, or they got ahead of me, then I felt like I would kind of lose control and I couldn't cope with it very well. And then, yeah, that would hurt. So, kind of practicing that a few times and realizing, like, no, it doesn't matter if I feel out of control. I have to relax. And I just make myself. And once I could figure that out, then it was like, oh, this is manageable. I can do this. It's hard, really, really hard, but I can do it. The midwife sent the doula over just to make sure I was really in labor. And then a little later, she came and our birth photographer came and the assistant midwife came. And yeah, so they all just came and parked. And I didn't really want to have any vaginal exams just because of my history. It just sounded miserable. But then, of course, you get into labor and you become a different person.
Yeah, and she was like, we obviously came up with this plan and wrote everything out for what we wanted in case we had to transfer, or just so that I knew how I could support her in this process. And so, she had very clearly stated on there, no vaginal exams. And we get into the moment, and she's full blown labor, and she's like, just bring her in here. I need to be checked. But I think
just do it.
Yes, right. And you would reiterate that, like, she didn't actually think she was in labor, literally until she was,
until the first exam.
Until the first exam.
It was like 2 a.m. that night.
Like it was just still so, it just had not set in with you yet. Whenever I'm like, she wants to have a vaginal exam. I came in here and talked to the midwife. She was just sitting here at our kitchen table. And I was like, I think she wants to be checked just to be on the safe side. She's like, that's fine. We can do that. It was just funny how, you write out a plan, you would do all this stuff, but stuff changes, and it's just the way it goes.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was 2 a.m. and when she checked me, and I was 4 to 5 centimeters and 100% effaced, and I just started bawling, and I was like, I'm in labor. I'm actually in labor. Like, we're actually doing this. This isn't fake, because I just knew I had called everybody there for nothing. So she let me get back in the pool, and that's basically where I did most of the laboring. But I feel like I never had like my waters break. I feel like they started trickling in the birth pool.
In the pool, yeah.
It was the weirdest sensation, really weird sensation, but I felt like I was just kind of leaking water most of the night in there. And then around 4:15, I was falling asleep. So Jonathan had gotten in the pool with me. He was sitting behind me, holding me up so that I could just relax my entire body. And so I would fall asleep and then have a contraction, usually hop up and get on my knees and lean over the side of the tub for the contraction, because that's how I felt like I could actually relax my stomach. And then I would lay back on him, go back to sleep. 3 minutes later, or 2 minutes, or whatever it was at that point, I would do it again. Well, around 4:15, I woke up to this huge contraction. It was like, I have to push. And I freaked out because in my head, it was like, this is too soon. And somehow I just knew inside, like, this is too soon and I don't need to be pushing yet. And so I called the midwife. She came back in and checked me, and I was only at 8 centimeters. And she said she felt like there was a cervical lip starting. So she's like, let's not get on your stomach or like lean forward during the contractions anymore. Let's try to lay backwards. So I did that for about an hour. And she said, like, do not push, which I can't even explain. You cannot not push. It's so hard. When your body is doing it, you just can't not. And she thought it was the baby's position, which she told me later. Our daughter was in kind of this awkward position where she kind of had to rotate a little bit. So she was pushing on a nerve, which was creating that pushing reflex a little too soon. And it's funny because even looking back now, like in my gut, I knew I shouldn't be pushing yet. Some things I need her to check me and make sure before I push, which was just kind of interesting looking back that, like, in the moment I knew that. And you got to trust your gut. Like, God gives us intuition for a reason. So it was about an hour of trying not to push, had her check me again, and I was at a 9. And she said I did have a cervical lip at that point. So then she's like, let's try to get out of the pool. And she put me in every contorted position in the world, except for leaning forward, which was the only one that felt good. So those 2 hours of trying not to push were like the hardest part of labor. It was really challenging to try to relax and not push and not lean in, forward in the one position that felt good. So around 6:30, she just, midwives are amazing. And she saw the switch happen where I had gone through transition enough. I feel like I'd gone through transition at that point because all of a sudden she's just like, she stuck a couple homeopathy tablets in my mouth and said, lay down. She shut off the lights and was like, go to sleep. And I like passed out for like 25 minutes, like slept hard. And it was that lovely little window. And she like caught it. She knew when it happened, which was just amazing to me.
Yeah, because I was like, we had printed off this sheet that had all the different stages, so that way I could kind of like help and maybe be aware of what's going on, and so I had it up on the wall, so I was trying to look, and like I totally missed it, but she got it. I was like, oh wow, yeah, that is transition.
Yeah. So that was fantastic because I was exhausted, and then at like 7 a.m. I just woke up to this huge pushing contraction, and I just shot out of bed. I couldn't lay down with it. And she's like, okay. I said, please, like, check me one more time. I want to make sure I'm okay. And she said I was at a 9, but she said she could push the cervical lip back over baby's head. And that was uncomfortable. It wasn't like, I've heard a lot of people talk about how horrible it was. I think the cervical lip wasn't painful. It was more painful just the exam part of it because of my pelvic floor issues. So she got it back over baby's head, and like after that it was go time. We just had to start pushing. And the next 5.5 hours, we did everything in the world. We sat on the birth stool for most of it. And just, it was a very long pushing stage. And one of those other things that you look back and you say, I would have never picked that. But God knew what I needed. And he knew we needed a very slow delivery. And so they took the sheet where they tie the ends of the sheet and they let you pull on it. And that was like fantastic. I said, for every other birth, I want something hanging from the ceiling that I can pull on for pushing, because it was so helpful. But the midwife, the doula, everybody took turns on the other side of the sheet, and it was just hour after hour. And I think it was about 10 a.m. So it was about an hour and a half before she was born, that my midwife, she sat down on the floor in front of me and she said, Victoria, you are progressing, but you're very tired. And I mean, I was falling asleep between the contractions. I didn't have enough strength to push. I think it would have gone faster if I had been a little more.
Well, if it hadn't taken that long up to that point in time, your body had already been through so much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she said, if you want to transfer, we can, but you are making progress. And I looked back at her and said, I just want to get the baby out and I want to get in my bed. I don't want to go to the hospital. And she said, okay, we're doing it here. We are going to finish this. And she pulled Jonathan over and sat down and prayed with me. And that was one of the most amazing moments in the labor for me, was just having these two people who I knew cared so much about the outcome of this. And they're just praying with me and being the strength and saying the words I couldn't in that moment. So yeah, they both prayed with me, and then we started again. And at that point she tried every different position. So back to the cramps. I was having horrible, horrible leg cramps all through the pregnancy. And of course I got them in labor as well. And so I would be sitting on the birth stool, making progress finally. And then I would get a horrible cramp and be like, I've got to stand up. And the little baby would go right back up inside. And then it was starting over again. So many times, like, they'd have me do squats. I was on my hands and knees. I was in all these different positions, and we couldn't find a position that I didn't get a cramp in. So that also, I think, slowed it down a lot, because I just kept messing up the progress I was making.
No. No.
So,
yeah, your muscles were having an issue, but
yeah, it was challenging. It was really challenging. Then around 11 o'clock, also, my midwife started using olive oil on my perineum, as well as some like essential oils. And I was swelling so much, so she was concerned that was also going to be a factor for tearing. But it was like, knowing that she was there, it was very uncomfortable. I didn't love her putting the oil on and everything, because at that point, everything was just uncomfortably touched for me. More, not necessarily because of the birth, but more so because of all the scar tissue and stuff that was still there. But she was incredibly gentle and just very much like, we've got to do this, and this is going to help. So she did that right up through crowning. And then right when we got to crowning, she said, okay, like, we're going to put you on the bed, because I'd been on the birth stool at that point. And she wanted me up on the bed so that way I could do like the semi-reclining position so she could support the perineum as the baby's head came out. And I don't know how they moved me because I was dead weight at that point. But the midwife, the doula, and my husband all got me up on the bed. And that was another thing that was really neat looking at. And it's just fantastic to have somebody there who knows what they're doing, because she got me right up to crowning and knew that the next contraction would be when the baby would come, and then moved me. And like, it's like just that wisdom of having that woman there who knows and is able to help you walk through those things that you just, when you're in labor land, you have no clue what's going on around you. And all the research I had done was gone. I couldn't remember anything, but she was right there with us and just kept everything moving forward very smoothly. It was really, really cool to see. But yeah, she moved me to the bed, and the next contraction, baby's head came out. Yeah, it was all of it in one, wasn't it? Yeah,
Yes,
it was one
it was all
contraction. Yeah. Yeah, she had the cord up around her neck, so she just slid the cord off when her head came out, and then her body came right out really easily. And it's so fascinating. The ring of fire is real, and it is really intense. But I think the weirdest sensation was her little legs coming out, because they were like flopping. So it was like her head came out, which was like, this is solid, and then the shoulders, but then these little legs flopping. It was just a really odd sensation. But yeah, she had an Apgar of 8 at a minute and 9 at 10 minutes, so she was perfect. She didn't scream or anything right away. It was very
quiet.
She was very quiet. She just looked around and was just kind of taking it all in. But yeah, it was like amazing. Like the moment she was born, my brain, I came back to earth. And it was like, oh, I'm here again. Like everything's okay. And like my contractions stopped instantly, which was good and bad. But it was like, oh, I'm here, I'm alive, and I felt like I returned to my body. It felt like a lot of labor. I was watching myself from the outside. It's just fascinating. That labor land is just a very interesting place. So apparently she had like an incredibly thick sac. So I think my midwife had tried to break it at one point and couldn't because it was so thick. And then also she had a really long umbilical cord. It was like 3 feet long. So it's just surprising she didn't get all wrapped up in it.
Very long umbilical cord.
Yeah, it was very long. And her head was 14 and a half inches round. So from my understanding, a normal head size is 13 inches. So we somehow delivered a head that was 1.5 inches bigger than a normal average sized baby's head. And I didn't care. I had one teeny tiny, she said it was a tiny 2nd degree tear. She's like, I could put 1 or 2 stitches in it if you want, but she's like, I don't think it's necessary. And of course I opted to not get stitches because that just did not sound pleasant.
I'll pass, thanks.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But I just couldn't believe it. It was like such a gift to be able to deliver a baby with a really big head and a lot of pushing. And I mean, like I said, I wouldn't have picked 5.5 hours of pushing. That was really long. And I was really swollen afterwards. So swollen. But it was the gift that I needed to slowly get her out. And I went back to my physical therapist 6 months later, and she said, Victoria, I don't even know how to tell you this, but there is no scar tissue anywhere. And somehow that lovely little head had just pushed through all the scar tissue and broke it all up, and it healed my pelvic floor, which is just absolutely incredible to me because you always hear about the opposite happening in birth. And to be able to say that birth was what healed all that scar tissue is just, it's such an amazing thing to me. Yeah, so my contractions stopped, and I was, of course, announcing it just very happily. And my midwife's like, oh, okay, you're not feeling any contraction. And apparently her kind of description of it later was that my uterus had just worked so hard it just quit. It was tired, it was done. And it had already sheared off the placenta, which we didn't know at the time, but it was just sitting there, like basically, I guess on the other side, the exit of my uterus, just kind of just sitting there.
Cervix.
So yeah, my cervix. Yeah, that's right. That we delivered that 13 minutes later. And then she's like, yeah, this is a little more bleeding than I want to see. And we'd already talked about I didn't want Pitocin. So she tried a couple things right off the bat. Like the moment that the baby was born, they just started sticking stuff in my mouth. And so she had already tried some stuff, and she's like, yeah, are you okay if I just go ahead? I just don't want, after all of that, to have to deal with a hemorrhage. And so I had lost like 780 cc's of blood is what she guessed. So she's like, at that point, let's just go ahead and give me the shot. And I was fine with that. So she did it. And then the bleeding just stopped, like really quickly, which I was really thankful for. So yeah, and then it was just, we cut the cord and Jonathan cut the cord. And then it was just a really, really sweet time of being back in my body and having my baby there and just knowing everything was okay. It was so exciting.
It's very beautiful.
Gosh. It is so beautiful. It is so incredible. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on all of this?
So during that whole time, it was, with my background, obviously it was a little bit, I was worried that I wasn't going to be as helpful as I could have been. And because I was not worried that I wasn't, going to be there, but worried that I was going to have a hard time jumping into that supportive role like I should. And I was also worried because with some of my background, I was like, oh, I'm just going to jump into, EMT mode or whatever and medical mode and not, focus on her. As much as I should, and instead like looking at like possibilities of things that could go wrong. So I was very thankful that didn't happen. And, it was like, honestly, it was both exhilarating and emotional and just exciting all at the same time. And, I don't know, I guess just as a man, just watching her go through that was just incredible. I just thought it was amazing to see what her body could do, but also just the way that she looked at me during that whole time was just this. I knew I was giving her a peace and a sense of security that I was there the whole time. I mean, like I only left her side like to go grab something to eat or to get her something, and vice versa. But it was literally just one of the most beautiful experiences that I guess as a man I could have been a part of. And it was so neat to see how I could be involved and how I could help. Obviously, going through the Bradley class, we learned like how I can support her, but it wasn't until I got into the nitty gritty of actually doing it. It's like, oh no, I actually need to be here, because like she was just gone. Like, I mean, she was not there. It was such a weird, experience, but also beautiful at the same time, because it was like watching her body go into this mode of, I'm getting this thing out, and like, we're going to work on this and get it out. So it was such a neat experience to be able to see how I can help and what I can do, and the fact that I can be incredibly involved in that process, and also help her through that process and help her through every single contraction, holding her hands, feeding her, giving her something to drink, just holding her. I mean, there is just amazing to experience that, and such an incredible bonding experience that we shared. That whole thing was just absolutely amazing. I mean, we've never experienced such closeness, such oneness, such intimacy. Going back to intimacy, right? It was just an amazing experience, and I wouldn't want to give that up. I don't want to be the guy sitting on the couch waiting for the baby. Like, I want to be there, and to be able to witness every single thing, every single moment. And I think it was just a beautiful, beautiful time that we got to share.
Yeah, we kept saying in the weeks after, well, that first week especially, it was just like, okay, that was the most incredible thing that's ever happened to us. It was so cool. And we both were very much like, let's do it again. Like, I really want to do this again, because it just felt like it had taken our marriage to a different level.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to do it again, and like to keep seeing where it leads, because it's so uniting. Yeah, it was really, really amazing.
Gosh, I have loved thinking of birth in this way of, it's like a magnet. It can pull a couple together, especially when you take the approach that the two of you took, where you were preparing together, you were thinking things through, you were trying to figure out, how is this going to work? How are we going to work together? We want this to be an incredible experience. So, lots of forethought, lots of intention. The experience happens and it just pulls you together in a way that can never be undone. And there is the other side of that of, if we don't see it for what it is, if we don't see how powerful it is, then it can actually pull couples apart. A magnet has two sides, it can
Yeah.
pull apart. And
Yeah.
it can be so dependent on how we approach these things. How amazing is it to know I have a say in this? Like, I can have this be an experience that pulls us together by being involved, by choosing to participate. Jonathan, it sounds like you were just like, yeah, let's do it. I'm going to go in and be involved, even acknowledging I have some concerns. Like, I'm scared. What if I do this? Or what if I am in my head about that? Or, having these ideas, but still saying, I am going to be as deeply involved in this as I possibly can. And the fruit that has come from that is just, that's so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. So, in the 2.5 years that it has been since this birth, what's the update here? How has everything unfolded and where are you guys now?
Oh yeah. After the birth, went through the whole postpartum healing process, and it was amazing. It was so much easier than I thought it was going to be. I had bought all this stuff for postpartum and didn't need most of it, and then a lot of information, but finally went back to having sex, and it was like, oh wow, now I know why people like it. So it was incredible. Like, the pain was gone, all the issues were gone, and then of course, like I said, went back to my physical therapist, and she was just blown away by how much it had healed me. And so yeah, it was amazing. So we went through the whole, I guess, 2 years of Josie's life, and then yeah, we're expecting our second girl right now. In a couple of months, and we are so excited to do it again. I literally cannot wait to go into labor. Don't love being pregnant, but I cannot wait to go into labor and to do it again and just see, what God has for us this time and what that will look like, and how the story is going to unfold for this little one. So we're very excited.
Wow. Jonathan, any thoughts on this?
I just love kids, and it's just I just cannot wait to hold another sweet life and another sweet child, and just share those, in those same moments of intimacy again, through the labor and delivery process. And just to be able to see you in that moment again, it's going to be fun. And I look forward to the differences that this one might bring too, and the new challenges that we might face, because the last one was really long, but hoping it's not quite this long this time. But I'm just really excited to. We've both talked about this so many times, like, to just be in that moment again of closeness, and just to be able to share that time, and to have a little time off from work will be nice too.
Yeah.
Be home and sharing the family time. So
Wow. I think there's something so powerful in that, in what you just said, in this idea of, I'm excited about the new challenges, to be able to go into something with, yeah, okay, it's going to be a challenge. There's going to be challenges. All right, let's do it. I'm excited. Let's tackle it. What a beautiful outlook. I really appreciate the way that you guys have approached your entire story. I mean, it really is so inspiring, and I think that it's going to provide so much comfort and support to those who need it, whether their situation is the same or not. I feel just so grateful to have heard all of this and inspired. Like I said, just that's the word that's coming to mind. I am really excited for the two of you, the three of you, as you meet this new baby, this fourth family member. What a thrill. I can't wait to hear how it all unfolds. Victoria, Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on the Happy Homebirth podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We love to be a part of it.
In this week's episode, we heard from a mother who experienced a swollen perineum after 5.5 hours of pushing. Now, with this length of pushing, it's not surprising that there was swelling in the perineal tissue. That's a lot of pressure for an extended period of time. So, for today's educational tidbit, I want to give just a couple of tips for how you or your care provider can support a swollen perineum both during birth and in the immediate postpartum. Now, remember, this isn't medical advice. I'm just providing you with options to research on your own. Do what you feel is best, but here are some great starting points. The first consideration, homeopathy. Arnica is an absolute gem for swelling and bruising of all kinds, and so is Bellis perennis. For labor, look into the 200C potency as opposed to a 30C. This could be taken during your labor, especially if you or your midwife begins to notice swelling, and it can be taken after birth as well. The double, actually triple benefit. These same two homeopathics are known for helping to prevent excess bleeding and, in my own experience, are a slam dunk for decreasing or eliminating afterbirth pains. You can put a few pellets of each in a glass of water and take a sip anytime you notice after pains ramping up. Wish Garden also has an arnica oil with added St. John's wort that's a fan favorite in my home, and many midwives swear by it as well. It's a beautiful option to be able to apply this to the perineum both in labor and postpartum. Olive oil is another way to help the perineum stretch and remain hydrated, just as was mentioned in this episode. Finally, collagen and gelatin supplementation throughout pregnancy support so many parts of your body and your baby's body, including the perineum. This hydrates the body and increases skin elasticity. For collagen, I often supplement by mixing this in my coffee. And when it comes to gelatin, you can make gummies, marshmallows, or even sprinkle some over your ground beef when you're cooking it. Honestly, this helps with your amino acid profile anyway, so you're really helping your body and baby on a number of levels. I'm linking my favorite brand of both of these, Perfect Supplements, in the show notes. They often have deals when you order these two together, and you can use the code HOMEBIRTH for a discount. And if you love this kind of in-depth information, you're going to thrive inside of Happy Homebirth Academy, my complete childbirth education program for homebirth mothers. Click the link in the show notes to join now, and let's head into the episode roundup. How do you feel after such an inspiring story? I'll tell you, I had so much that I wanted to share, but I really felt the Lord telling me to stop and to focus on only two pieces. And I understand because I don't want these two things to get lost in the weeds of wordiness. This is too important. So, number one, I want us to focus on the loving way this couple worked together and their positive outlook. The entrance that Victoria and Jonathan had into marriage was unexpected and highly challenging. These are the types of situations that can so easily cause discord and animosity between couples. How easy would it be for either one to take their hurt and pain and twist it into a weapon instead of allowing it to pull each other closer? Despite the feelings of why, despite the darkness, the hurt, the challenge, Victoria and Jonathan continued on as partners working together. And now they're reaping the benefits of that choice. They now get to experience intimacy on so many levels, and they know that they can trust one another to be steadfast love even in hard times. And number two, confession and repentance. When Victoria told God the truth, it changed everything. I want to trust you. Help me trust you. The truth in that moment was that she didn't trust him, and that's what she was telling him. God can work with that. He led her to repentance. He changed her mind with his truth and was able to finally help her open her hands and surrender. Sometimes we think of confession and repentance as, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, and maybe a few more I'm sorries, but that's not really what confession is. When a detective is asking a criminal to confess, is he asking for an apology or is he asking for the truth? When we confess, we're telling the truth. And repentance, or the Greek word for repentance, is metanoia. It also doesn't simply mean I'm sorry some more. It's the way you think differently after having had your mind changed. And who can change your mind best? In my personal experience, confessing to God and sharing the truth of my heart, even the deepest, darkest corners, especially the deepest, darkest corners where my real thoughts hide, sometimes even from myself, the ones I wouldn't want anyone to know, when I can search that out and be honest, when I can have him search it out and bring it up to me and tell him the truth, he brings about repentance. He shows me the real truth of the situation. He provides me with new perspective, with his heart. And boy, when that happens, my mind and the way that I think is truly changed, truly healed. Now I'm not striving to be better. I'm made new with new revelation and understanding, usually about just how deep the Father's love for us really is. Now back to Victoria. Isn't it beautiful how we see this play out? She tells God how she's feeling, and then wow, lo and behold, this new ability to release and surrender comes from where? From nowhere? No, from her good Father who loves her. I'm linking 2 of my favorite books that dive into these topics in the show notes if you'd like to dive deeper with this. All right, my friends, another story so powerful that I know its telling was for someone specific. If you needed this story, let it be a witness and a soothing balm to you. May it fill you up. You are loved. That's all I've got for you for today. I'll see you back here next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Are you looking to extend the home birth support, encouragement, and education? Join us in our Facebook group, Happy Homebirth Podcast Community, and check us out on Instagram at Happy Homebirth Podcast.